Hello, Mark Peterson, Construction Pro Tips. This is Jerome Worm.
Hello.
Jerome's going to show us how to set a door today. Not just any door, he's going to show us how to set a double door. And to make things even more interesting, he's going to show us how to set a 8-foot double door. It's pretty much the same process, a couple little different things. And he's going to show us as he would do it by himself. I might give him a hand, but the process that he uses is basically the one that he'd use by himself. So what's the first step, Jerome?
Well, the first step is actually I did it already. Is I prepped the door frame.
So unpackaged it. And,
unpackaged it
right?
and stuff. And then
did it come with the doors?
The doors are not in place. The doors and frame come separate.
Okay.
Sometimes they do send the door with the frame in, or the doors in the frame, but we take the doors out so it's later to get the frame set, and then we set each door individually after that.
Sure.
So, but the first thing I do after that then is then I take this temporary block and I put it up in the corner.
Okay.
So that when I set the frame, the door doesn't fall out, and I'll quick do that.
So that's just a temporary board, just so when you set the frame in place, it doesn't keep going through.
Correct.
All right.
Yep.
And you obviously shoot it so the casing is going to cover it up.
Exactly.
All right.
Yep.
Great.
The next step I would do is level the floor out, and I place blocks on the floor across the door. So I lay the level on the floor.
Right. Why not just right on the?
And
why the blocks?
The reason I use the blocks is because there's protection on the floor. This is a wood floor that's already in, it's pre-finished.
Right.
So I have to get my level up off of that because there might be something underneath the cardboard.
Throwing it off.
Yeah.
I suppose yeah, okay. So this is the finished floor. We got 2 blocks and we're.
Yep.
How are we looking? Are we level?
Yeah, we're looking really good. Looking really good.
So what if it wasn't? What if it wasn't good?
If it wasn't looking level, what I would do is I would find out how much out of level. I'd put a shim under one end and find out how much I needed to adjust, and I'd cut the jamb off a little bit of its 1/8, 3/16,
because the jamb's going to be sitting right on the floor.
The jamb sits right on the floor.
So if there wasn't a finished floor here, you probably just raise one side or the other?
If there wasn't a finished floor, depending upon what the flooring is, I would maybe just lift one side or lower one side a little bit. I wouldn't set it right down on the subfloor. Mm-hmm. I'd lift it up a little bit so that it'd allow for room for flooring or carpet or whatever happens to be going in there.
Right.
So.
Okay, but we're good here.
Yep, and this is good. And then the next thing I would do is take my level and I'd plumb the sides of the door.
Yeah, that's a 6-foot level.
Yep, and I'd check both sides.
Right.
And and they're both real good. Now, if one side was off a little bit, one way or the other, I'd take note of that. Like if the bottom was kicked in or something, when I set my frame, I center it on the opening. But if the bottom is kicked in a little bit, I'd probably hold the frame a little bit off center.
But you're just eyeballing at this point.
I just eyeball the centering, and it just is a temporary set. And once we start setting the doors, we'll move the frame to where it needs to be to fit the doors.
Great.
All right, the next step, Mark, is that we take these blocks and we install them onto the frame. These are temporary blocks.
Just scrap pieces of wood?
Scrap pieces of wood that I've cut, and then I pin these onto the frame with 3 pins.
Yeah.
And put one.
So 18 gauge?
It's 18 gauge pin, yes. And then I put one at the top and one just below the bottom hinge.
All right. So that's
the reason.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I put them on both sides. And the reason I put them above and below the hinge is some people like to put their shims in below or above the hinge, but I like to put the shims directly behind the hinge because it gives it more support. And also, in the future, if you decide to try and adjust the door, if the shims are above or below the hinge, it tends to bend the jamb, and it pops it out, and it doesn't look right after that. This here keeps the frame or the jamb straighter with the door.
But it temporarily holds it in place, and you're putting them in places where there's not going to be shims.
Correct.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm doing, yeah.
Okay. So attach the other side, and then we can throw it in, right?
That's what we'll do.
Okay. All right, I assume the next thing is to set the jamb in place.
That's right, Mark. We'll just set it in place. Normally I'm by myself, but today you can help me.
All right,
I appreciate that.
All right.
Yeah, we'll just set it into place
and try to put as many dings in the ceiling as possible.
Yep, exactly. Now, I grab my ladder.
There's the board's holding it, so it's not pushing all the way through.
It's not pushing all the way through. And then my next step for me is I pull the jamb all the way to one side.
Right.
And I go about halfway back.
Okay.
And then I put a nail in there to hold it temporarily until I got a door installed. So, and that'll keep it there. And then now my next step would be...
You're not even going to do the bottom?
Nope, not leave the bottom float free so that I can move that around. The blocks on the bottom will hold it in place. It'll be okay.
So okay, so we're going to hang this door on the hinges, and I notice you don't have a hinge right there on that top one.
Right, and the reason being is if I had that top hinge, I'd have to use a ladder to get to that top hinge, and it's really dangerous to be hanging on a door and climbing the ladder and trying to put a pin in.
Yeah.
So I take that top hinge out, and I just use these bottom 3 hinges, and I put the door in at that, and then once I get these pins put in the hinges, then I go and I attach that hinge back. And I placed the other half of the hinge on the door already, and I'll just put the screws back in, and we'll have a door hung.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, we'll set the door in place, and like I said, we took the top hinge off.
Yeah.
And then grab the door, walk over.
You want me to give you a hand at
no,
all?
No, because my finger's in between the door and the jamb,
yeah.
so...
Right, so you're saying it's a one-man job.
Yeah, place the first hinge in place.
Yeah.
And get the pin to slide down in there. And then you can get the other pins in place.
I suppose, and then not having that hinge attached just makes it all easier to align too, I would imagine.
Yeah. There we go.
What kind of doors are these?
These are alder doors.
Alder.
The wood is alder.
All right.
Okay. Sometimes you get a little problem with the hinges lining up. There we go.
Okay.
Got that in.
So we got one set, and
now I grab my drill and I'll put that other hinge in.
Are we going to shim this and get it permanent before we do the next one?
We will not. We'll install the next door so we can fit the frame, fit the frame to the doors.
So, and the bottom of this casing is not even attached. So really, you're using the door as a straight edge, pretty much.
Correct. Correct.
So instead of trying to line that jamb up perfectly straight, you're letting the door do the work.
Exactly.
Nice.
Exactly. And that you can't get it any straighter than what the door is. That just fits perfect then. Now I'll take this other hinge off. Whoops. I guess that fell out. Normally it don't, but thank you. And I'll get another pin out of my pocket and install this in here.
Oh yeah.
So that it's there when we need it. Don't lose it that way. And we'll take these other pins out. Sometimes you got to tap them a little bit with the hammer to get them out, because they're actually supposed to lock into place once they're all the way in.
Right.
And then we'll install this other door.
And again, I'm not going to help you.
Right. These are actually pretty light doors. The other doors that are in the house are paint grade doors, and they're a lot heavier.
Oh, the MDF?
Yeah. So, my trusty hammer handy. Tap the pin in place. Okay, just let the door shut. There we go.
All right.
Uh-oh. A little issue here. It happens once in a while. I didn't watch my hinge, so we'll have to pop that pin out and reinstall it.
So even you make mistakes.
Oh yeah. I'm glad to make mistakes.
I think the last time I worked with you, I figured out you've hung about 10,000 doors or so, and that was a few years ago. So.
Yep. So
even the pros make mistakes.
Yep.
Of course, I'm probably distracting you as well.
That's fine. So we'll attach this hinge. As you see, the blocks are holding the door.
And you only have one pin. What, or is it 15 gauge you put on the sides of the block?
Yep.
All right. So you have two 15 gauge nails.
Yep.
Holding this whole contraption up.
Yep.
And you're feeling safe about that?
You bet. All right, now I find some shims, which are behind the door.
So shimming is the next step. All right, so the doors are in, and I noticed that the gap at the top is smaller than the gap at the bottom, which means one or both of the two bottoms has to come in a little bit. How do you know which one has to come in and how far?
That's right. Well, Mark, what I do is I back up, I look at the top of the door, and I see the top of the door is not lining up. So it tells me that the right side of the right door has to come. Yeah. I have to put shims in by the lower hinge to bring the top of the door up. Right. And I just shove them in part way, and then I step back and look and see where it's at, and then I probably have to go over to the other side and put shims in over there. Okay. And just keep the top lined up, and eventually we'll have the gap the same in the middle.
So it's all about reveals. There's no squares, there's no levels, it's all about reveals. Yep. Okay. And another thing I noticed is the gap is kind of wide at top, so I'll probably have to put some shims by the top hinges and bring that in a little bit more so we get a good equal margin all the way down. Okay. So that the door works properly afterwards when we're done. All right, so we've got the doors hung, and we've looked at their margins, and the tops are not even, so I'll take Bottom's got to come over.
Yeah, I'll have to put some shims in this right side. Just tap them in right behind the hinge, right where I want them. Right. And then I'll step.
That's where they're going to stay.
That's where they're going to stay. And then I look at the door and I see that now I've got to put some shims in on the other side. Right. And you notice we got a little bit of a breeze from the windows, and that's kind of going to keep opening the door for us, which is fine at this point.
But I suppose if it's a windy day, that is can be a pain.
Yeah. Tap it in a little bit, and get the gap a little closer.
So the shims are just in at one side. Are you worried about them twisting the jambs at all?
I will put shims in from the other side once we get the door straight. We'll tack it in place. All right. And we'll make any minor adjustments we need to do.
And we're not worried about shimming the middle at all?
Not at this point, no, because the door will take care of the jamb. The hinges itself holds the jamb straight. Okay. And I probably will put another set of shims in behind this hinge once I get everything in place. Right. And that just helps hold the door in place. Sure. Because sometimes the gap in between the jamb and the stud is a little bit further. Right. So I'll make sure there's something solid. Yeah. If there's no shim on the screw, the door can move yet. Right. You want solid wood behind the screw.
Do you cut blocks if it's really a big gap?
Right. If it's a really huge gap, I'll probably put blocks on before I start setting the door, and then I'll go according to that.
So now the reveals, you're happy with the reveals? Or?
Well, the reveal is still a little wide for this type of door. So what I'll do is I will take shims and I will bring the top hinges in a little bit.
So those blocks have enough movement in them that you can still make adjustments?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, they'll move. I'm not going to move it that much.
So what kind of gap do you want between the two doors?
Well, I would like to get to about a 3/16 or so, somewhere in that area. Not quite as wide as it was. It's getting a little better. We'll go to the other side. And we'll put some shims in there.
And I suppose the top jambs, most of them have a little bow to them one way or the other. You just kind of...
Yep. And I look at the joint, the middle seam, and then I look at what kind of a gap I have at the top of the jamb from the door to the jamb. And I noticed that margin over there had a nice margin. This one's still a little tight. So I tap the shims a little more. And now you notice our margin is at about 3/16 of an inch. Right. And now I back up and look at the doors, and I can just keep making minor adjustments until I get the...
And that's the beauty of those blocks. You can just adjust and not have to worry about it. Yep. And there's enough wiggle room to let you do the adjustment.
So you just keep adjusting until we get it right. And there, I'd say we got a pretty good margin at that point.
And the bow at the top, you know that's just the jamb.
So yeah, that'll get a jamb, and we'll take care of that. We'll shim that down once we get the rest of the door in place. And at this time, I'm probably going to go on the other side and finish shimming the door from the other side.
So the jamb
So the jamb stays straight.
Yep.
And then I'll shoot nails into the jamb. I like to shoot 3 nails by each hinge, top and bottom. And I use 2.5 inch 15 gauge nails.
Okay.
If you use 2 inch, there's not enough goes into the stud. You need that 2.5 inch.
So that's a big,
security.
that's, all right.
And we do have screws to put in these hinges once we get that all in place. We'll make sure everything is right before we do that.
Screw in every hinge?
No, just a screw on the top, 2 hinges, the bottom 2 hinges, and probably being it's an 8-foot door, we'll probably put screws in that hinges too. So,
all right.
And a lot of times I don't put the screws in right away because when the painters come through, they take everything apart anyway. So just to make it easier for them, I leave the long screws out. Until
so they're going to pull the hinges off.
They pull the hinges, doors and hinges off,
right.
and they go from there.
You mean you're actually worried about a different subcontractor? That never
Oh
happens.
yeah, I always try to think about the next one down the line as much as possible. So, but
that's great.
Yeah, but you see the doors, they hang really nice. They're nice and even, which is a really good thing.
Yep.
And we got a nice margin, and they seem to stay shut except for that little breeze that's blowing through here. So
and that's the other thing. And so what happens if they're opening and closing or opening by themselves or closing by themselves?
If they're opening and closing by themselves, most of the time it has an issue to do with the wall. It was either plumb one way or the other, or maybe one wall isn't quite plumb.
Sure.
And the weight of the door itself will open it. And but the only thing you can do with that is if you can shift the bottoms a little bit, one way or the other, to kind of help that.
Yep. But you want to make sure not only are the reveals good and it's open and closing, but it's staying.
Correct.
Before you permanently screw anything or
Right, I try to do that, try to get that all in place. So like if I open the door and I leave it sit there like that, it should stay there.
Right, excellent.
So.
All right, let's finish her up.
Now I'm going to shim the backside, and I kind of eye up whether the jamb is straight or not, so that the door will work properly. And now that the door is swung open, one thing you do need to watch a little bit for is that the jamb is centered on the 2x4 wall. And I got too many shims in my hand right now. So, but I got a bar here, and I take it and I pull the jamb back to where it should be, and I nail it. Okay, I do the same thing at the bottom. I check the jamb, and I slip some shims in there, and make sure the jamb is somewhat square with the world, and I can nail that in. And then, now that I've done that, I want to check the doors and make sure they're still okay. See you in a second. Everything's looking really good on the inside. Everything is nice and smooth. So I'll come out and I'll put shims in on the other side and nail that in place. Nice and flush with the wall on both sides. Makes it easy for trimming later on. Especially with this type of trim. This type of trim has a header on it, so we want to keep the jambs nice and flush with the sheetrock so that the trim will adhere to the header piece, and we won't have any gaps in the jamb, from the jamb to the header. And I normally use 3 nails by each hinge. It's just something I learned when I started in the business. I just still do it. So just habit, I guess, but you can use more or less, whatever you feel is adequate. So we got the doors shimmed. They're working. Everything looks good. Now we'll shim the top. I just use one door to shim the top because our doors are nice and even, so we can just use one. And so I climb up and I get some shims lined up so I can go from both sides. And by going from both sides, you keep the jamb nice and level. And you just bring it down so it's a nice even margin on the other side. And it works, the roller catches good, nice good click there, and you can nail it in place. And I like to stick a nail in the stop a bigger nail in the stop so that when the door hits it, it doesn't eventually start working it loose, because most of the time these door stops are put on with 18 gauge 1-inch pins, and they work loose after a while. So there you got it. You got a nice working door with nice even margins, flush with the wall. Next step would be is to cut the shims off. Cool. All right, so now that the door is in position, I cut the shims off, so that allows room for the trim, or otherwise it's a hard fit around that stuff. And the reason I use a multi-tool to cut them off with is because I've got arthritis in my wrist from using a utility knife all those years, and this is a much better way to do it, and it doesn't abuse your body. So there you have it.
All right, we got a big, tall double door. It shuts properly, it opens properly, it stays, it doesn't swing by itself. You made that look easy, Jerome.
Well, thanks, Mark. It wasn't a lot of years of experience and a lot of luck.
So, and then you mentioned the screws will go in after the finishing guys come back. Same with the hardware, I would imagine.
Yes, exactly.
And does this door doesn't get hardware on the floor?
This door does not. This just has roller catches at the top. It's like a library door or something like that. You just kind of open it up, and or a study, I should say. And
all right, excellent. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Mark.
Stay tuned for more construction pro tips.